Hey, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Duffy from the Wild Wild West. Give me a hands up if you're from the Wild Wild West like me, out in Buffalo. All right. Joined by my colleagues, I'll let them introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jen Raponi from Midwest Auburn.
Good afternoon. I'm David Mumper. I'm from the Hudson Valley Auburn.
All right, and so we've got a three-part presentation since there's three of us here. So Jen's gonna get us started.
So like I said, Jen Raponi from Midwest Auburn. I have been working for the Auburns. This is my 8th year, and I've been working really closely in that time with OBEWL to really look at SIFE and how SIFE students are being programmed and identified across New York State. So in that work, I developed a tool that I'd like to share with you today. It's a self-assessment tool that I've moved into a Google form. I am putting the direct Google link in the chat for you, or you can scan it with your phone on the QR code. So this is, we get a lot of questions about, first of all, how do you identify SIFE? The first time around is often really challenging. It's an extensive process. And it's often gray. We want it to be really black and white, but sometimes it's really gray, and it takes a lot of data collection and a lot of speaking with parents and students to figure out if a student is eligible for SIFE status. And then after they're identified, the big question becomes, well, now what? What do we do with them? So this self-assessment tool is really an overarching survey to look at how the CR Part 154 regulations are being followed in your district, and then how you are implementing programmatic best practices for your students. So I'm going to give us a couple minutes to take the survey, and then we can debrief about that. So go ahead and click on the forms link in the chat or scan the QR code. It is a scale of 1 to 5, so giving it a score of 1 means you're very comfortable with the knowledge and implementation of that particular statement, and giving it a 5 means you're very uncomfortable, so you don't really know about this particular statement. So go ahead and do that. Give us about 5 or 6 minutes, and then we can debrief.
Do you take a picture? Scan it.
If you want to scan the QR code, you can just open up your camera, and it should bring you to the website link. And if not, there's the form is right in the chat for you to click on the direct link. One more minute before we debrief. Okay, so the scale that you graded yourself on was 1 to 5, 1 meaning very comfortable, so we don't have any work to do in this area, and 5 being very uncomfortable. We have a lot of growth that we can work on in this area. So if you want to go ahead and put in the chat one thing of the self-assessment tool that you feel that you and your district are very comfortable doing, and one area of growth that you might need to focus on for SIFE. So I see people are starting to respond in the chat. And I can see your overall results, which I can share with the group. It's all anonymous, it's just ranked. So it looks like overall people are pretty comfortable with the definition of SIFE, explaining the SIFE ID process, using the MLS. Some things that are uncomfortable, perhaps, are implementing alternatives to the MLS when the MLS is not available in student language. Creating flexible programs that fill in gaps for students. Training all teachers on best practices of SIFE. Post-secondary options for SIFE. So it looks like overall as a group, people seem very comfortable with the regulatory process, which is not, that's we're pretty much there right now. These regulations have been in place for, 5 years now. And it looks like the areas of growth have to do with programming and long-term planning for the education of SIFE students. So there's a paper copy that's attached to this for you to use. You can feel free to take it to extended leadership or to your staff if this is some self-reflection that you want to do around SIFE. And the purpose of this is really to get you to think about, where are we in the process of providing an equitable education for SIFE? What resources do we have already? So resources, by resources, I mean human capital, monetary resources, and then the materials you already have as a district that could be looked at and possibly redistributed. So what already exists, and then what needs to be built in order to really provide SIFE students with an equitable education. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to our next segment for me? Okay, well, thanks for listening. I hope you find this tool helpful in your context. And I'm going to write my email address in the chat also. If you have any questions about how I use this or how we work specifically with districts around this tool, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions around SIFE for you.
Thank you, Jen. Michael, are we able to share a screen? I can share mine, or if you want to share yours as we go through the next couple slides, just so they can take a look. You're on mute, Mike.
Do you want to share yours so that you can navigate at your own pace?
Sure. All right. Doing now. You guys should have the self-assessment tool up there. Could you just nod or give me a thumbs up if you can see that?
Yep.
Great. And Jen, folks can, we'll share these slides. I think we may already have. They can access that self-assessment tool there at the link and use it for their purposes
Correct.
and needs, if they're right. Great.
Yep, absolutely.
So this is a short slide deck that we put together here for you guys that you'll have access to take a look at. I wanted to share for just a few minutes about instructional models for SIFE students. And our title for today was Best Practices for SIFE Students in ELA. And I think someone asked us about this leadership schedule earlier in the summer, and it was the first thing I saw, and I couldn't not jump on it, because I'm an ELA teacher, an ESL teacher back when it was an ESL teacher, and I had SIFE cohorts for about 5 straight years in my high school in Brooklyn. And so, for what it's worth, this has been the absolute greatest privilege in my teaching experience to teach SIFE students in high schools. So I just have a few minutes, and I want to kind of give a big picture of something. And I just want to connect back to our opening comments that Elisa shared about the evolution of the name of our language programs from foreign language to LOTE, right? So the first is something foreign. The second has to do with, well, it's maybe not foreign, but it's certainly not English. And I just want to connect that to this concept of SIFE, which we're discussing today, because it's yet another way to sort of define a field or a student, right, in terms of what they're missing. And so in this case, we're talking about students whose formal education has been interrupted. So I'm not here to sort of challenge or suggest that we rename it, but I just want to highlight that when we use a kind of deficit lens like that, we often have a instructional response that attempts to fix deficits. And so I will say without reservation that one of the worst things that you could do for your SIFE students is to come up with an instructional program that will narrow in on grammar and spelling and the aspects of language that it appears that they're deficient because their instruction has been interrupted. Does that make sense? I get a nod or a thumbs up if you're with me on that. So I taught lots of grammar. And so I taught SIFE students for 5 years in an ELA context, and we absolutely did grammar. That's not my point. My point is that what's going to really drive your instruction is what I'm describing here. So if you can see my screen, variously, we can call this problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning, the things that you would want to do with any student in your schools. In other words, things that are exciting, things that will engage them, and things that will allow their identity to become a part of the learning. And that is really crucial. And so I want to submit a few images here. And I'm proud of these, and I share these a lot because they were my students. And so there's a couple prompts there in the slide. I want you to look up at the right. How do we establish a community of learners out of a linguistically and culturally diverse group? There are students here who were SIFE students, although they're approaching grade level, and there are students in here who are not currently, when this photo was taken in 2010, able to write or read in any of the languages that, in some cases, they speak 3 or 4 of those languages, right? And so again, I just want to highlight here, SIFE, yeah, that means that something's been interrupted. There's some deficiency, for lack of a better word, in their ability to read and write in the content. On the other hand, you're looking at a room of students where some of them speak utterly fluently 3 or 4 languages. And so the question is, and I'll go down to the next prompt on the right, what materials and curriculum could possibly be relevant to these students? There's 9 languages in the room, 9 first languages. So this is those of you in a Big 5 district or in a New York City district, I'm sure can relate. And finally, what is a culturally relevant approach look for students like this? It's as many cultures as you could really kind of fit in a traditional high school classroom. So I'm sharing this, and I'm going to just go back a slide to highlight again, how and why would we do an inquiry or a problem-based model with SIFE students? Well, for the same reason we would do it for any other student, right? But especially for students that are in a SIFE, with a SIFE history, because of their need to really bring to bear all of the experiences that they have had that haven't necessarily been the literate kinds of experiences that we're used to. So this is a picture on the left is if you could see my mouse cursor here, I'm not sure if that shows up. This was essentially a live website that the students created, and Jim Cummins calls these kinds of things identity texts and things like that. This was a little more robust than that. You essentially have an ethnography project where you have a classroom of SIFE students. You can see here the actual sort of learning process. You can see that we had sections about who we are, where we're coming from in terms of the neighborhood students lived in. Each of these was contributed by a student. This is all original writing by students about what it means to do an ethnography, about the etymology of the word and what it means. Of course, this would be familiar to many speakers of a Romance language. And so here's a exemplar of a student publication that was on this site. This was a SIFE student who, after a few weeks of the project, wrote this bilingually. And then we co-edited his English together so that we could get this on our site. And so here's a SIFE student, and here's his writing. And this is what it looks like after some editing. I made a note over here about the importance of location. SIFE students tend to be coming from somewhere into a New York school, although not always, by the way. Mapping where students are located, where they're coming and going, and sort of what is their identity bringing to bear on the learning cycle. And community and belonging is obviously important for all students, but for SIFE students, you can imagine why that might be really crucial. There's a slide here after that one that has two links. And I wanted to share this to give you some short, really teacher, administrator friendly articles on accommodating newcomers and SIFE students. The first is called Newcomers, the First Days, Engaging ELs in the Classroom Community. Like Jen and Michael, we've done a lot of work as Arburns working with districts to think about how to serve SIFE students and how to serve newcomers. And this is a really fabulous short, looks like 6 or 7 pages, a couple little examples of classroom activities. You could actually do a reading group on something like this with your departments in a day or two and think about some best practices. If you don't have a protocol as a district for what do we do with newcomers, not just SIFE students, but newcomers in general, then you're missing a big puzzle piece. In addition to whatever their learning cycles will be for the next months or years, you really want to think about explicitly, if a student joins us in the middle of 10th grade and they didn't get that middle school to high school experience of transition, and they don't know what a schedule looks like, and the families are utterly overwhelmed, well, I'm going to recommend that you at least start with this article because it's a good one. The other link that's in the presentation here is an article that I wrote in Ed Voice a few years ago that summarizes more or less the instructional unit that I'm calling the ethnography that you saw in those slides. So what you see here is some original work product, what it looks like for SIFE students to be engaged in inquiry learning. My sort of first person narrative of what it's like to be a high school teacher with SIFE students and to try and do things like this. Obviously, none of this is a first draft. These are all sort of publication ready exemplars of students. Some of the writing is absolutely brilliant. I'm not going to read this because I'm going to start crying again. This is a really beautiful moment of a transition from a student from Panama to my classroom, to our high school in Brooklyn. This you saw earlier in the presentation. So again, it's very short. There's just a few good references here about culturally responsive teaching and super diversity, this concept of having so many languages and cultures, that being responsive doesn't mean being responsive to one aspect of an identity. So just in summary or review here, we've got the first days, which I encourage you to think about as a particularly as leadership teams, what are our protocols, even if it's just a few bullets, for welcoming both academically, socially, culturally, welcoming newcomers? And then what does it really look like to do problem-based or inquiry-based or student-centered work with SIFE students? And I'll just end my short little lecture here with an urge to absolutely stop yourself whenever you feel like you're doing hours of grammar or hours of corrective writing or papers that are just marked up with what it looks like to have subject-verb conjugations. And I say that as a teacher who will absolutely do that with my SIFE students. But first, your SIFE students are going to need, they're going to really need to do things like this, right? And so what that means is this writing was edited, co-edited, brought through Google Translate a billion times. But what's really happened is students are interviewing one another with a microphone and saying, here's where I live, this is what my neighborhood's like. If you've got a bilingual Chinese student like Jason had, he could take the interview, they could transcribe it, this might be done as homework. But what's really crucial here is that students are engaged in deep, rigorous projects that reflect the fact that they have incredible histories and assets, just like every other of your students. So that's usually longer than I lecture. I'm going to pause here, and we have just a couple minutes if you'd like to ask me any questions or have any thoughts about these resources, and then otherwise we'll move on to something next. Again, these links are in the slideshow, which you'll have. Those are the two files here to the short EdVoice articles. And I'll stop sharing too. Thoughts or feedback, or dump it in the chat. Otherwise, you've got these materials at the ready. And from my point of view, I would give you two crucial pieces of guidance around SIFE students. One, utterly marinate in student-centered projects and inquiry and joy, right? And then two, have a protocol or a policy, right? It doesn't need to be board approved, it doesn't need to be complex, but you as a department, whether it's ELA or TESOL or et cetera, have some policy and protocol for welcoming newcomer students, other than be really nice and give them a schedule in their language. If you can do those two things, then you sort of have, I would say, sort of the main puzzle pieces in place. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. Thank you, Jen. So I'm going to bring us into the final portion of our presentation today. And you know, there are some ways that we purposefully wove together our planning and our stories, and then ways that are unexpected. And when I think about you know, the focus on project-based learning, I'm sitting in a high school today that I'm at 3 days a week in my role at Auburn, Lafayette International Community High School, that's part of the INPS model, and one of their focuses is on project-based learning. They service at this school, all students when they arrive have been here less than 4 years, so they start at the schools technically still as newcomers. So it's an exclusively L high school. They had an 86%, I think, or 83% graduation rate last year with their first cohort of graduating seniors. And so, you know, I think it speaks to the power of having a good instructional model. And so I think some of us have received a lot of PD on SIFE, and we may kind of associate bridges with SIFE, although if we've attended enough, we may remember that this is for a subset of SIFE students, those who have developing literacy in home language. And we know SIFE students are, you know, 2 or more years below what we would consider grade level in their home language. So it's a larger subset than what Bridges is attempting to support us with. And Bridges has a lot of lessons that we can learn, but what I'm bringing you today comes from the INPS model. I'm sharing one strategy that they offer on text adaptation and that they've been using at this school. So we're going to just go through this kind of briefly here, put you in the shoes of the learner. So I want to first start off by painting a tale of 2 teachers. So when you see the example on the left side of your screen, you're kind of looking at what is the ELA teacher. You know, sometimes we encounter an ELA teacher or content area teacher that's maybe a little inflexible. And even as an adult that speaks and reads in another language, you may look at that text on the left and say, I don't even know where to begin. I don't know how to attack this. I don't know what to, I see two numbers and I see something that looks like a heading. That's about all I get. And then we see so that's our mother superior teacher, right? And then we have our Mother Teresa ENL teacher, who sometimes is at the other end of the spectrum, who overcompensates over the fear that their students will get frustrated, overwhelmed, and give up. And so we go to some of the things that David pointed out with maybe an overemphasis on foundational skills and grammar, which we know they need, but we can't only spend our time there. So, you know, there is a way to give students access to complex text and grade level material, you know, by having a healthy balance. So one way we can accomplish this is through, you know, text adaptation. So I don't speak Arabic. I just put it up as an example that may be more intimidating for us to look at, to put ourselves in the shoes of a learner. But I do speak French, so I'm going to have you engage in this in a language that I assume most of you don't understand well or read well. But we're going to look at this section of a text, and I'm going to share a link with you shortly. And I'm not going to make you do any hard work. Don't worry, we don't have enough time for you to fully engage in looking at this text. And I wonder if, as anyone glances at it, if they even recognize what it comes from. But we can talk about that during the debrief. So what I'm going to actually have you do is follow this link I'm about to share in the chat, which will bring you to the text adaptation strategies table that I'm sharing with you. And I'm going to put everyone in breakout rooms and let you self-select which of the text adaptation strategies you'd like to look at. So as you can see, there are 6 of them. So you can just pick one of the 6. And then if you scroll all the way down, you'll see the text and I've adapted it. You could see, what did I do from that section, right? From that, you know, for example, what did I do from formatting? What did I do related to, sorry for my bizarre scrolling here, culturally specific speech, word challenges, sentence challenges, subject verb, and achieving language objectives. Did I address it? Did I not? Okay, so so your task is simply to look at which text strategies did I use. So when you click on that link, you'll scroll down and you can see what would be helpful to you as someone fully literate in one or more languages. So looking through your own lens, and then what would be essential if you were a SIFE student. Okay, so think about which of these particular strategies must we use with our SIFE students. Okay, so I'm going to take a moment to put you into groups of 4. And we have 52 people, so I'll make 12 or 13 groups. And we'll give you about 4 or 5 minutes just to kind of talk it out, pick a lens or 2 to look at it through, one of those 6 strategies, and we'll go from there. Any questions before I put you into groups? If you've got the link and you've got these questions, I'll also put the questions in the chat. You should be all set. All right, I don't know exactly how many people are waiting for. Breakout rooms are closed, so everybody's back. All right, so I know that wasn't a long time to engage in conversation, but hopefully it kind of gave you a taste of how you know, teachers may be able to apply several different types of text adaptation strategies to give our ELs, specifically our SIFE students, access to grade level text. That was, if you weren't aware, the part of the first chapter of To Kill a Mockingbird, right? So high school text, a little intimidating in another language, even though you know how to read in a language already. We know that there, you know, we're all familiar with this, but I think, you know, in that position and looking at it through that lens is helpful. So rather than spend too much time debriefing your experience, I do want to be able to leave you with some considerations when we're thinking about the ELA classroom, thinking about an appropriate level text when we have students who are, you know, reading several grade levels below in home language. If we're having, you know, if we have a student who reads at a kindergarten or first grade level in home language and we're providing them with a 9th grade level text in English, that's beyond their frustrational level. And it's not that they can't find meaningful access, but we have to think about how long we're asking them to do that and what scaffolds we're providing. Are they going to read To Kill a Mockingbird on their own? Definitely not. Does it make sense to have them sit and listen to the whole text? Maybe not, right? So we know already good methodology says we're going to present information in multiple ways. You know, if we care about talking about the themes that are in the book, we don't have to just read the book to talk about the themes and apply the skills. So we may only read a paragraph, do some close reading work and develop language skills via a portion of the reading. But we're not going to spend long periods of time reading many grade levels above where their current reading level is. So consider alternative parallel texts on the same theme. Read short sections of grade level text to practice those skills and standards. When we think about, in one of the groups I popped into, we talked about how can we work across content areas so that the ELA teacher, the math teacher, science, social studies, all of our content area teachers are using these skills or these strategies rather as tools rather than everybody approaching it differently. How can we be cohesive so that we're all working on the same tier 2 vocabulary, which we know is a linchpin for comprehension of grade level text. How are we looking at comprehension strategies like annotation and writing scaffolds so that you know, students can apply them consistently across content areas and it becomes a tool rather than another thing to learn. Capitalize on student strengths, as David touched on, trying to get away from deficit thinking. What are they missing? What do they bring to the table? Strength in oral storytelling oftentimes. So have them rehearse orally before writing. Let them access the home language they do have in group work. And then balance that time between stretch texts and texts at their instructional level. Of course, we need to spend time developing literacy skills, especially if they don't have foundational literacy skills in any language. We need to allocate some time, but in the ELA classroom, we're also trying to make sure they have opportunities with stretch texts. So I was told to end at 1:55, got it right under the button. And so we'd like to open it up to any general questions anyone might have across any of the sections of our presentation.
I just wanted to thank you. I mean, I think probably all of us on this call are of like mind on this, but I really appreciate how you took into account the kids' abilities and their brains in this beyond just the reading and writing abilities.
Yeah, I think the three of us, even though in an Arborn we work on a variety of things, we've kind of taken it up as you know, one of our niches and where we devote a lot of our time for our own professional development and in any of the school-based work we do. We're in schools that have many SIFE students, and so you know we know that there is some degree of you know, good teaching is good teaching and it's often good for all students, but we also have to think about it through the lens of what are the special, you know, essential things we need to do based on the needs of this particular subset of students.
Yeah. Thank you for your comment, Liz. I asked myself once, how much am I willing and able to learn from my SIFE students as a teacher? And then I became a really good SIFE teacher. And you can go to a classroom and you can really find out in a matter of moments, are people in the room learning from the students? Well, then it's going to soar. And if they're not, then you've missed the opportunity. Because again, like back to Lisa's first comment here, you know, LOTE is about other than English and foreign languages is about foreign. And your SIFE students have one thing that many students don't have, which is a pretty amazing set of experiences. Most kids who are not in a formal education environment are doing something fairly demanding, whether that's working or traveling or taking care of, you know, a family. And so I would add that to our little sort of PD checklist here. Can you learn from your SIFE students? Then you're succeeding. And if you're not really learning much from them, it's probably not going to go very far.
So I wanted to take this opportunity and jump in only because we have 3 minutes left and just celebrate the amazing specialists that work and support the Arborn world throughout our state of New York. Jen, Michael, David, I'm so grateful to you. I want every folk on the call to know that not only do they wear the hats of the responsibilities of the districts in their region, but they always answer the call whenever we give them a quick phone call and say, are you able to present? Are you able to share? What exciting information do you have? Not only that, but they're also a large part of the task force that we have at OBEWL, representing you in the work for the good of the children. And so I stress the fact of the wealth of knowledge that our specialists from the Auburn world and the associates hold. So I wanted to celebrate you and thank you. And so, as you notice, ladies and gentlemen, this is being recorded. Our intention is to be able to provide you with access at your convenience.